Okay, we done? Okay, so welcome to the, now I need to get the right title. Welcome to the Transformation, Commercialisation and Corporate Services Scrutiny Committee. Thank you all for coming today. That was a bit of a mouthful, but it's our new title for the new Scrutiny Committee. And welcome everybody. And just to remind everybody that today's meeting will be recorded, and this recording may be broadcast on the authority's internet. All attendees will be in view of the camera, and by attending you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of these images and sound recordings being used as outlined above. Okay, so if we move on to the agenda item number 1, apologies for absence.
Councillor Smith, Chair, and Councillor David Jones is here as his substitute member for the committee. And you said you'd had apologies from Councillor Harvey Jones, is it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, Chair.
Okay. Moving on, declarations of interest. Members are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and prejudicial interest in respect of matters contained in this agenda in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government and Finance Act. Any interest to declare? No? Okay. So moving on, if I could refer you to agenda item number 3. If anyone's got papers, this is page number 3 to 16. Okay, so bear with me a second, because I'm trying to use my screen as well as my notes a sec, so please bear with me. Okay, so just as an introduction to this agenda item, to prepare the plan you see before you today, I gathered information and recommendations from yourselves as committee members, the improvement plan, and of course the corporate plan, and then worked with Scrutiny support to develop what we now see as the draft work programme. Today's meeting, the primary goal is for members to consider the proposed topics, confirm whether the current description of the required report is valid and focused, and to consider how the new Cabinet Forward Work Programme will be included in future agenda settings. The desired outcome for this agenda item is that the report is approved by committee members. And I would also like to propose at some point looking at the time of the meeting. So with that, I will go to questions first, please. Clive?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On the date of the meeting on the 14th of September, you've got commercialisation as an item there. Can I suggest that that is perhaps moved just a few weeks to the 19th of October, and that the Welsh Public Library standards could be swapped with that? And the reason I propose that is that there is a report on setting up the commercial unit going to council tomorrow night. 2 out of the 3 staff it's recommending there should advertise for those positions, and my view is that the officers concerned, and particularly the commercial manager, may well have only just taken up their position. If they're coming from as an external successful applicant, they would have to give notice and start settling into. So my view is perhaps the 14th of September is just a few weeks early, Chair.
Yeah, I would agree with you in that respect, because as we often do with this meeting, the work programme, although we agree it at the start of the year, we always ensure that it remains fluid and that we're able to have that flexibility. And I purposely left room, and if you look, it's quite light. The agenda is, there's not a month where we have a really, really heavy agenda. And I did that purposely because I knew that the Cabinet Forward Work Programme was imminent, and that may very well bring up some other things that we wanted to add in. And of course, as the year progresses, we tend to evolve and things will come up that we can add in. So, and you know, quite aptly, Clive, the second quarter of the Cabinet Forward Work Programme is imminent. So I think I totally agree. I think it'll fit better with the Forward Work Programme, and it'll fit better with the points that you raised as well, Clive. So I'm more than happy to do that. I'll just do that simple swap around that you suggested.
Chair, are the rest of the committee happy with that suggestion?
Any objections? Oh, there we are. Thumbs up from Lee. Thank you, Lee. I didn't even know there was a thumbs up button.
Yes, there is. There is somewhere.
Let's maybe date, Anya.
I never knew that. The thumbs up button.
I know I'm going to be looking for that later.
I can always put a
Okay.
thumbs down too if you want. So
No, you're okay.
I don't think that's available anyway. There is a heart on there, mine. So yeah, be careful with that one.
Yes. Okay, any other questions on the work programme? No? Okay. If we move on.
Chair,
Sorry,
I think
go on, Jeff.
Claire Payne has got her hand up as well.
Oh, sorry, Claire, I didn't see you. I missed that then. Go ahead.
That's okay. Sorry if this is a silly question, but does the change in the scrutiny committee name have any impact on the work that we'll be undertaking as a scrutiny committee?
No, it's not. There is no such thing as a silly question, Claire, and it's a very relevant question, actually. My understanding is that no, it doesn't. We still cover the same sort of. We still have the same remit. We're still very much around the policies and governance and that sort of thing. Our cabinet member, Andrew Barry, who's with us today, remains the same. It comes under his portfolio. So there's nothing to suggest that it'll be any different.
Thank you.
Dec, did you have a question?
Yes, Chair, just a quick one. It's in regards to the tackling poverty report you bring in on the 20th of July. It's committee members are keen to review the council's debt collection process. Can you make sure that they have the figures on how many people are behind with their council tax, how many people have been forwarded onto court and that sort of thing? Because the figures, I think, were quite high, to be honest. And I'm just wondering if things have changed during the pandemic. I know I've referred some residents onto Steve so he can sort out like payment programs with them. And I just think it would just give a good background to this report. Okay,
no worries, that's fine. Can we capture that in the action planner, please? I'm not quite sure who's recording the actions. Is Maria in the meeting?
I am, Chair. Yeah,
happy Have you got that, Maria?
I have, yes.
So if me and you pick up on that when we have our pre-meeting. Lovely. Okay.
Chair, sorry, I haven't put my hand up, but in addition to what Declan said, as well as a cabinet member, it may be an idea to have one of the officers who's involved with dealing with all those aspects of debt, etc., there as well, so that they could help and assist in answering any points or questions that are asked.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have we got that as well, Maria?
Have indeed, Chair.
And either Mike Parry or what's his name, Mark Price would need to be. Yeah,
okay. Okay. So any other questions? Okay. So there is one thing, and before we go on, there is one. Any comments? Okay, there was a proposal I wanted to make today. I wanted to propose that we move the scrutiny time forward slightly to instead of starting at 4, I'm proposing that we start at 4:30. It would certainly make it easier for me in terms of my job, and also I know that there's a couple of committee members who've got the school run, and it would make it easier for them. So I'd like to be able to propose that. Could I ask somebody to move that, please?
Sorry, before you put it to the vote, Chair, if you can bear in mind, because the meetings are on a Tuesday, and we have our Labour group meetings, which start at 6:15. You know, the later you start, obviously, the later you're going to finish. So you may end up with maybe 3 of us having, if the item is still being discussed at 6:10 or even before, they may have to leave that meeting. I'm just pointing that out. That could be likely if that happens.
Okay, Clive, I think it's definitely worth me considering that. But I do think it's manageable as long as we're mindful of that, you know, and we just try and be a bit stricter on the timings. So, Julian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I take Clive's point, and it'll affect David and, well, not so much David, but Bill and
Harvey.
And Harvey. But I think all that's called for really is good chairmanship, and I'm sure we can rely on you, Tanya, to steer us in the right direction. So I'm prepared to move that we change the time of the meeting. I don't know if somebody wants to second that.
Yeah, Chair, I'll second that. To be honest, those times are good for me because I pick up my grandkids from school run, and I'm always rushing, to be honest, to get back to it.
Okay. David?
Thank you, Chair. Are we allowed to change the times of the meetings? There are some other issues around other areas where because it was passed in the AGM, that you're not allowed to alter what was put in the AGM without good reason within 6 months.
Yeah, I did query that, Dave. I checked with Democratic Services before the AGM, and because of course I thought it might have to come up in the AGM, but I was assured that the AGM wasn't the right place for it, that the first meeting after the AGM would be the right place to raise it, and as long as it goes to the vote, then there's nothing wrong with it. And I've had that confirmed from Democratic Services.
Thank you for that, Chair. As long as you've looked at it, it was just a consideration of mine. I thought that once it was passed in the full council meeting, that it couldn't be amended for 6 months. But if you've checked it, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it would be the AGM as well, which is why I queried it. But that's the advice that I've had.
Thank you, Chair.
Lovely, thanks, Di. Clive?
Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but as you probably know, that didn't quite happen as far as the planning committee was concerned, because a different time was inserted there, which I must admit, I think all members missed. And there's been a great deal of lobbying in the last few weeks. And from the legal opinion, which I had from Simon Jones, was that decision could stay for 6 months until a motion was put before the council meeting in December. But I think, as far as the planning committee members are concerned, what was taken into account was the fact that we took a vote at our first planning meeting, which happened to be at 5 o'clock and not 4 o'clock, because there were licensing matters on, and there were other licensing meetings taking place before that. And as a result, I think, they've said for the convenience of members of the planning committee, although the 6 months rule is there, that the meeting would change back to 5 o'clock. So there seems to be some, I don't know, slightly confused thinking about this. But
Okay.
if Democratic Services, and I presume you're talking about Ann Taylor or Ann Taylor and Caris, have told you, well, that's fine.
Yeah, I had the advice from Anne herself, Clive. But, you know, if there is any discrepancy, what I would suggest is, Lee, I'll come to you in a second. But if there is any, what I would suggest for this evening, we can only go on what we know right now. I can only go on the advice I've been given up until now. So I would still like to be able to put it to the vote. If in time we discover that the advice, there was something incorrect and actually this does need to be looked at again, then maybe we look at it again then. Is that okay with everyone?
That's fine, Chair.
Yeah, okay. And Lee, what were you going to say?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The first meeting I was in when we changed the time was neighbourhood services. It was something that was brought up like this, just in conversation. And then when we did it in region, then Anne asked for it to be set as an agenda item. And I'm not sure if that needs to be done. But if she's giving you the advice differently, then
again, I did ask about that, Lee. I did ask if it needed to be raised as a separate agenda item, or whether I needed to do it in a set process, and I didn't really receive anything back on that. So I took that to mean that I could just do it as part of the the forward work programme, because obviously agreeing the programme, the time is part of that as well. So that's why I figured it would be best to raise it under this agenda item.
That's fine. I just pointed it out, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Okay, so if there's nothing else, could we put that to the vote then, please?
Do I?
Sorry, so first, sorry, if I could ask people to, firstly, to vote. If anybody wants to abstain, please raise your hands now. Sorry, Julian, I should have said that before. Can you put your, are you voting to abstain, Julian? Your hand is up.
No, I'm completely lost on this. We'll carry on. No, I'm not.
Okay, can you just pop your hand down a second? Okay, so anybody voting to abstain on this? Please raise your hands now. No. Okay, is anybody voting against this? Please raise your hands now. Okay, and finally, anybody in favour, please raise your hands now. It's lovely. Okay, I think that's carried then. Myra, did you get that?
Yes, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so I think we're okay to move on to the next agenda item. And the next agenda item is the agenda item, agenda item number 4, agile working. Just do the little, let me go back to my notes a second, bear with me. I could have done with 2 screens today. Okay, so just as an introduction to this agenda item, over the past 12 months, the committee has discussed the possibility of reopening the one-stop shop at the Civic Centre to meet community member needs. This is something that has come to scrutiny through public referral, and many local people are keen to see it reopen. I think I speak for many of us when we that have had members of the public come up to us and voice concerns about it still being shut. However, as a result of the pandemic and repeated lockdowns, it's not been possible to do this safely to date. As the vaccination programme has been rolled out and the statistics around infection rates has decreased, I wanted to raise this topic for further discussion with committee members, the cabinet member and the responsible officers, so the planning for the safe reopening of the facility can be completed. I would like to propose that we establish a task and finish group that will have 2 main objectives. That one, as a security committee, we actively contribute to that policy alongside the agile working policy. With many officers still working from home, how do we need to adapt and what will the new model look like? I would also recommend that the Cabinet member plays a part in this working group and brings the outcome back to the committee for final scrutiny and challenge directly to Cabinet member. And secondly, with the feedback we've received from the Improvement Board and the recent introduction of the Local Government and Elections Act, this allows us a practical example of how we can take a scrutiny referral from the public, directly from the public, right the way through to Cabinet and eventually the adoption of a policy after receiving critical challenge and proper scrutiny process. So in effect, we go in full circle. So if I open up to questions first before we put any proposal forward, any questions? Clive?
Thank you, Chair. When I first saw this item 4, I was looking for the report with it. I hear what you say, but I would have thought that it would have been of real interest to all the scrutiny members to have seen a report from the officers. As we all know, they've been very heavily involved with the vaccination programme and keeping an eye on opening up buildings to all and sundry and the public. And I know there's frustration from certain members of the public about not gaining access into buildings to see officers. But my own view is that I think perhaps we should have had a report put forward by the officers as to where we are with all of this.
Is the question why we didn't then, Clive?
Well, as I said, it's been brought up by us before. And if you remember, this is going back a few months. At that time, we didn't have a report, and an officer came to the meeting to start answering questions. Now, in my view, that is the wrong way round. We need to know what are in the minds of senior officers as to how we're going to deal with this situation, i.e. opening up the buildings, and exactly what are the forward plans for agile working. And I would like to see a full detailed report of that coming to us so we can scrutinise that. And by doing so, we may well contribute or add to the points that have been put in that particular report.
Clive, was that a question or a suggestion?
Well, it was a well, it was both. It was a suggestion.
Clive, the question is, I will paraphrase for you. The question is, why weren't we given a report with all the relevant details? So just to come in on that before I hand over, we have got Greg with us today, Greg Edwards. And from my perspective as chair, I did discuss this with Scrutiny Support and Andrew Mogford a while back, and I agree it is unorthodox for us to do it this way round, but it was us trying to sort of do it in a different way. So rather than a traditional way of a fait accompli policy or suggestion coming to us as scrutiny, we then look over it and add further suggestions. We're coming in very much at the planning stages and helping to shape and inform that procedure going forward. So that it was sort of like it's a way of trying to do something a bit differently, Clive. That's why I made reference to, the improvement plan and also the new Elections Act, because it's all around trying to do scrutiny a bit more effectively and coming in at the planning stage rather than at the very end. So, it'll be interesting to see how this pans out, but that's sort of a little bit of the rationale. I think Andrew wanted to come in on that. Andrew, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think Clive makes a very valid point in terms of having something to go by. There's some work I think we need to do before we start to pick this up. there's a lot of statistical information in terms of those contacting, what that information looks like prior to the pandemic, how now we come out of the pandemic, what the trend lines are looking like, so who's contacting us about what. In terms of agile working, I think we need to be specific with agile working because that's a very broad subject. I think if we start with, I can get a report here from Andrew Mogford to look at all the statistical analysis of what's been going on during pandemic and coming out, and perhaps that will be a starting point so you can refer then to the need for it. I personally not had anybody asking about the reopening of the Civic Centre, and my question to Andrew Mogford recently was, have we found anything catastrophic happening in people's lives because it hasn't been opened? And the answer was no. But I suppose investigation of this very subject will establish that and give us a guide then. I welcome Scrutiny looking at it because it will give us a real guide as to what needs to happen next. I think in terms of what we're actually doing now, in terms of meeting on MS Teams, has been a revolution in how we communicate. And I think what we also need to do is to look at the alternatives to opening as well, possibly in terms of perhaps more outreach to community centres, having IT communication with people within their own areas, possibly. There's a lot to discuss really, and there's an opportunity here to do something, perhaps not traditionally just open it back up, but to take the opportunity to say, look, people are now operating in this manner. This is how we've helped people over the last weeks and months, and this is the reaction. It'd be interesting to see if we've captured any information on what people's views are to using the system as is. But if I get Andrew Mogford to put a report together in terms of what's happened in the last 12-18 months and the trend lines, perhaps that'll be a starting point.
Well, just a few things before because I think Clive's got another question and Julian's got a question. But before I do that, just one thing, Andrew, just to pick up on what you said. When you said was agile working is very broad, and you're absolutely right. We wouldn't necessarily be looking at the whole agile working thing because it's incredibly complex. It would be very much around if we've currently got lots of officers still working at home and there isn't any huge plan to change that in the future, and we've got staff that are still working at home and there isn't any big plan to change that in the future, how does that impact directly on the reopening of the Civic Centre? So it was still on that same theme and that same strand, Andrew, just for clarity. And just in terms of, I'm not quite sure, I think I'd have to disagree that on Andrew's assessment of, nobody said anything. I know I speak for many councillors, myself included, where, this being able to go into the Civic is a lifeline for many people, particularly the portion of our society that don't go online, which is significant. And I think that we have to, we mustn't forget that element of society really. So that's sort of my point there. If we go to, I think Councillor Amos was first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a question really, it's around what Clive said. What you're proposing to do here, getting involved from the outset, I think you said, and involving the cabinet member, isn't there something of too much of a blurring then between the scrutiny function and the cabinet function? And as I understand things, it's for the cabinet to propose a policy, develop a way of thinking or whatever, and it's for scrutiny to scrutinise it and to make any suggestions to change or whatever. If scrutiny hasn't been involved, although it sounds good from the start, then there's no one left to scrutinise it. So I think we are in danger with this, what you're saying, of blurring the lines between the two, between cabinet and between scrutiny. It'd be interesting to know what perhaps Andrew, as the cabinet member, feels about that. And I think you actually said that to involve the cabinet member in a group with members of scrutiny. Now, I've never come across that before, and I'm not sure whether that's such a good idea. But it'd be interesting to know what Andrew says after Clive's spoken.
Well, I think the rationale was coming from how can we get better. It's a valid point, Julian. I don't disagree with you. Just to give you context and rationale on how we came to that decision. So we came to the original decision, or the original proposal, should I say, because of course, you know, nothing's been decided. But the original thinking was taking things, recommendations and observations from the improvement plan. And that was one of those was we don't tend to involve and challenge and question the cabinet members enough. We tend to always direct everything to officers. So it was around how we could get the cabinet member to be more involved, more accountable. So by him sort of shaping a potential policy and then bringing it back to scrutiny for challenge, that's where it came from. But I think, you know, you do raise a valid point, Julian. And it's definitely something I need to take on board as part of the larger discussion. Andrew, did you want to come back on that? Clive, I haven't forgotten you. I'll come back to you. I'll come to you in a second.
Yes, it's a valid point from Julian. For example, you know, I'd be looking at the costs involved with reopening. You know, what are the opportunity costs in terms of opening, in terms of what else we could do with that space. There's also the opportunities, as I mentioned, from an IT perspective, or even outreach for us to have more personal service. So there is an opportunity for us to change that necessarily members would not agree with. But once we've done the analysis, once we have the figures, then, you know, we can make a proposal. And absolutely, I think at that point, scrutiny needs to be involved to do as it says on the tin, to look at what we are proposing, because our direction might be slightly different to members in the scrutiny panel. I think it makes a valid point, and I think, you know, to have that distance is healthy, I think.
Okay, Clive?
Yes, Chair, I'm in the invidious position of agreeing with nearly everything Andrew said this afternoon.
Whoa!
And of course,
Something's going wrong, Clive.
And Julian, of course, in my opinion, has hit the nail right on the head there. We have to be very careful that we don't really blur, and there are distinct lines between the cabinet function and the scrutiny function. And I know you're on questions, but the point needs to be made at this stage. Don't forget that we are still in a pandemic. I keep looking at these figures from Public Health Wales every day and going through them. And at the moment, there is a great fear that this Indian variant, if we don't, I mean, we've been very successful in Wales in getting the vaccinations done with as quickly as possible, but we're not there by a long chalk. And the latest figure, and this is probably about 2 days old, was that there were 350 people who've been identified with this Indian variant in Wales. I suspect there's probably more than that there. So at this stage, to try and open up all these offices, perhaps, I don't know, immediately, is going to cause more problems than it's worth in relation to keeping people safe and not catching this awful disease. And, you know, we have meetings with Ellis and Chris, Darren and myself. As recently as last week, it was mentioned about the possibility of offices opening. And I think the current thinking from Ellis and the management team is that they will look at that in the next few weeks. But initially, it could well be by without having a queue of people out through the reception hall in the Civic Centre and down the steps, that people would be invited in on an appointment basis so that they can keep control of it. but we are still in a pandemic and it's still causing problems.
Yeah, and Clive, that's why that was part of the remit. It was about how to do it, you know, when to do it, when would be appropriate, how to do it safely, and discussing how it links back to the agile working policy overall. So that's sort of where it started from. This isn't saying that we discussed it today and then there's plans to open the Civic Centre. It's about the preparation and planning for that.
Yeah.
Okay,
but I welcome Andrew's viewpoint that go away and get the officers to put this report up together with all the up-to-date information, and hopefully we can have that in the not too distant future.
well, if we just hang on to that a second, Clive, because I'd like to do that in summing up and deciding what to do next, if that's okay. So we've got a question from David, a question from Claire, and a question from Lee. So if we go to David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Largely, I agree with one of your earlier points. During the pandemic, the best way that we could do surveys was electronically. But what about the people who either don't or cannot use the internet? They are further distanced from surveys and decisions made on various surveys and consultations that we do. For example, I've had several people who've contacted me with regard to council tax because they prefer to pay in person.
Yeah.
Obviously, there is the issue of the pandemic around, and we need to be very careful about what we propose and carry out. With regard to opening the one-stop shop, several questions as we're speaking have come to mind. First of all, what percentage of the staff have been double vaccinated to give a low possibility of contamination? How many people will be allowed in the building at a time? How will that be controlled? Where will the interviews be held? What about sanitization of where the interviews have been held? There are so many questions on this, and I would tend to agree with what was said earlier on about having a report to discuss, rather than us try and put the things in place that officers may say are not possible even.
Yeah, okay. I think
That's an
there's a
awful lot of
general.
stuff in one go.
Okay, there's a general theme. There still wasn't a question. Well, there was questions, Di, but not quite in the right category, but I'll forgive you.
Thank you, Chair.
Anything else, Di?
No, that's me done. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so if we go to Claire, I know she's been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of listening to what everyone has said, I totally agree. I actually think that the working group idea would be a good starting point because it will bring all that information together. It will also bring different parties around the table, and you can have that discussion, like Andrew said, about looking at the way it's always been done, but also new opportunities to do things slightly differently. I know one of the main concerns is around the Civic Centre being an enclosed building, but given the time of year as well, it's about whether or not there can be any sort of outdoor facility that's provided. Obviously it gets a little bit difficult with confidentiality. It kind of depends on how that works. But Chair, if I may, just a bit of a comment really about the queries around the scrutiny elements. Way back when I started in the scrutiny committee, actually sitting with Maria and sort of trying to get my head around how scrutiny works at Merthyr Council, because it kind of differed to scrutiny that I was familiar with. And I think scrutiny has two functions, and I think we're there as a critical friend for all the decision makers. So I think there should be an element of scrutiny of matters before decisions actually reached. So Cabinet may be the people doing the steer. We then are the critical friend, just to provide our input. Now, we have no say whatsoever in the decision making. We are just there to kind of voice and say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? could do something slightly different here. And then obviously the decision makers have a much more kind of broad sort of discussion that they're making the decision on. And then, yes, there is a role for scrutiny afterwards in terms of sort of strategies and things to make sure that all the targets are being met. But I just think it's really good to have that two-prong approach to scrutiny.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. That's really helpful. Anything else, Claire?
That's all from me, thank you.
Lee?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, we're doing something similar in Regen at the moment. We're focusing on one report, and we're going to work with partners and do some co-production. That's the plan anyway. And thrash out what's important around policies, and then set key targets and dates so that can be scrutinised. Plus working with the public as well as RSLs and whoever else, schools, social services, and whatever else. My question is, I do have a question. In terms of meeting, David just mentioned it earlier. That was what I wanted to go on to. Is, are we doing any meetings electronically now via the one-stop shop, or is it all via the telephone?
Greg or Andrew, did you want to answer that question? Because Greg hasn't come in at all, has he? Greg, do you want to answer that one?
No, I've been sitting in the background enjoying the conversation, Chair. In terms of doing any electronic meetings at the moment from the one-stop shop staff, no, Lee. Back office departments have indicated that in some of the plans going forward, you know, and that is going back to the devil of the detail that we're going to look at and will be included in reports. The main part for us is how departments have changed the way they are dealing with the public since the pandemic started. We don't want to undo a lot of the good work and just say, let's revert back to type and open the doors and everyone goes, all right, this is how we used to do it, mass gatherings and queues, etc. Because there's obviously been a lot of work, just for example, on somebody mentioned about cash and people want to come in and make payments. Well, they're obviously making payments now, and that's been worked through our council tax department in how they do that. And if that's working well, why don't we continue with what's working well with certain things there? So for electronic meetings, that is one of the things we're really looking closely at for those people who need to speak to officers, haven't got the facility at home, and how we can offer that within the contact centre environment. So it's still as if they were face to face, but it'll be like we are doing here. So they'd get the answers there. And I know Councillor Barry has talked about the outreach there, and whether that is then you can go out and do it in an outreach facility in the same way. So not that everyone turns up to a building, but we can still offer these sort of virtual meetings. Is that okay at the moment, Chair?
Lee, you happy with that?
Yeah, that's great. I do think it's something we should be looking at, and I really like the idea of doing some outreach as well. You know, there's some people that maybe don't venture into the town centre, and you know, I think that would be a really good move. Thank you.
Okay, so it's been more of a discussion, which is fine and perfectly appropriate given the fact that this was unorthodox from the beginning. So are there any other comments just before we move on? David?
Sorry, David.
You're on your mic. You're muted, Di.
That's a first. Are we still on questions, or we moved to comments?
I think it's all been thrown in the mix today because of the unorthodox nature of this. I think we've just ended up having more of a discussion. So go on, Di. It's a little bit of a free for all on this today.
This is sort of follow on from what Lee said about outreach. Could we set up Teams meetings? I don't know, because I'm in town ward. Could we have a centre somewhere? No, perhaps not town is not a good one to pick because you've got the civic there. could we set up a Teams centre where we've got, I don't know, 3 monitors where you could, and this has just come straight off the top of my head, so I don't even know if it's feasible. But a meeting then that the general public could come in, go to a monitor and speak to someone, but then be taken off that, have someone to speak to them, like one-to-one Teams meetings. Is that possible?
Greg?
Just come back in there. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I was trying to explain in my answer to Lee, Dave. That is one of the possibilities we look at. Obviously, we're looking at it from the civic centre point of view rather than the outreach in our first thoughts. But the parts we have to look at is some of the other points everyone's raised here is about the cleaning regime, the safety stuff, and all of that as well. So the more stations we do, and how is all of that going to be secured. But the principle of it is certainly something that can be done. I think if you go way back when, before any COVID and stuff, we used to do outreach from contact centres into different areas of the council where council tax benefits used to have away days, lower end of the valley or up the top of the valley, where they'd have certain days where members of the public could come and visit there rather than having to come to town. So it's a kind of the same principle we'll be looking at, but via the virtual rather than the physical for the officers to travel.
Yes, great, and thank you for that. And I think if depending on how it would work out, it could very well be a good idea, even if it was done as an outreach.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Barry.
Yeah, it was just to pick up on that really and say, you know, anything's possible with IT, but the logistics are slightly more complicated. You know, who's responsible for that outreach equipment? What about the insurance? Is it secure? What happens if it gets damaged? So there's a lot to look into. But I think there's, as I alluded to earlier, I think there's a lot of opportunities in this as well. You know, people haven't been visiting the Civic Centre for the last 12, 18 months. What have they been doing? Are they happy to do something else? I think the imagination lies with us really in terms of what we foresee. I think it'll potentially have a great impact if we do take that outreach a step further in sort of involving our community centres and having them as, you know, integrally involved with what the council are doing and the services that we offer. And I think, you know, the starting point is, let's find out what's happened over the last 18 months and what people's attitudes are. And once we've got that, you know, it'll give us a sound platform to move on then. But I think it's down to imagination now, isn't it? What do we want this service to look like and how can we see into the future?
Okay, so I think just one more comment now and then I need to wrap it up. So Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Chair. I think what everybody's talking about, I think it's a fabulous idea that you can go out into the communities and perhaps use the libraries, the community centres, as Councillor Barry said. My only question about it would be, there's obviously the issues that Andrew mentioned about security of equipment and so on. But what measures, Greg, would you suggest could be put in place for privacy? Members of the public would be talking about what could be very private matters and wanting us to resolve. How could those conversations be made reliable, confidential and private, if they're talking to a computer screen and anybody, member of the public, could be in the background? That would be my only concern. If we could overcome that, I think the idea is a really, really good one, because I'm sure members of the public, it'll be new, but I think they quickly become used to it and realise how good it was and how much you didn't have to queue in the civic centre. So that, but my only concern would be a matter of privacy. It's the only concern I have.
Before that goes over to Greg, can I just say though that everything that we're discussing now, you know, is obviously something everybody's passionate about. everybody's got suggestions and ideas, but this was the reason really why we wanted as a Scrutiny Committee to shape that and to contribute to that at the very beginning, because traditionally what would have happened was the policy and all the facts and figures and the report and everything would have been agreed and decided, and then it would have come to us, and then we would have just scrutinised the report as is. Whereas now what I was hoping was that all these things that we've discussed today, things like outreach, concerns around how we manage it safely, concerns around people's privacy and dignity, all of those things can go into potentially shaping what the new way of working and new way of responding looks like. So to sum up, and if it's okay with you, Councillor Amos, I won't put that to Greg, only because I do feel that we need as a committee to determine the best way forward. So from my mind, you know, and this sort of links into what Claire was saying as well, if you've got a couple of committee members working with Andrew as cabinet, and they come up with, you know, they come up with some suggestions and start shaping that report, particularly in line of the agile working strand, as I mentioned earlier. I don't see really how we're blurring it if it then comes back to scrutiny, because it's at scrutiny that we're actually doing the challenge. Now, that doesn't mean that I disagree with anything anybody said today, but I'm open to, but I just wanted to make the point of, you know, I do feel that if we just go down the traditional route of get a report with all facts and figures and then it comes back to scrutiny, is that the most effective way? So I'm open to suggestions.
Well,
Councillor Amos?
yeah, it's the only way I can think. I mentioned it before, but the blurring, and if we have an input or we settle down with a group with Andrew, and we come back with a report, then wouldn't we? Am I missing something? Wouldn't we end up scrutinising ourselves? Because if we've had the input into with Andrew, and we come up with something with a report, then the report comes for scrutiny. So we're looking at things that we've done ourselves, and I still think there's a danger of this blurring of the two functions.
I tell you what, just as a suggestion, Councillor Amos, I'd rather not labour the point of whether we should or shouldn't be doing it, because that's something I can pick up with scrutiny support after the meeting, and I can certainly get some guidance on that. What I'm after really is suggestions, because there did seem to be a bit of a consensus about the blurring. So what would be the alternative suggestions? Councillor Jones.
Thank you. I'm going to move, because I think we've had quite a thorough discussion on this since 4 o'clock, that on this particular item, that is the subject of a written report presented to this particular Scrutiny Committee at the earliest opportunity, and I will leave it up to you, Chair, as to whether you feel we can put it on the July meeting or the September meeting. But that's what I'm moving, is that we have a written report with all the facts and figures and do our scrutiny job as we've always done in the past.
I'm prepared to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Julian.
Okay, so should we put it to the vote? Those in favour?
Are you going to ask for abstentions and against? And
no, Clive. Let's just do it. Who's in favour?
Oh, Clive's Clive's proposal.
Yes. Two, three. Okay, anyone opposed? So we got 3 votes for. Lee, are you voting against?
it's not so much I'm against it. I like the idea.
Sorry, Chair, we're in the middle of a vote. You can't sort of have conversations in the middle of a vote.
I'm just trying to find out.
Sorry,
It's one vote against, Lee, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, and any abstentions? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're missing one. We're missing a vote. I think it's carried anyway. Okay, so we'll just go back to the old way. We'll get a report. We'll do it as we've always done it, and we'll do that way. The vote's been carried, and if everyone's happy, we'll move on.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment, please, Chair? I did have my hand up before that went to.
Sorry, Lee, I missed your hand. I'm starting to get a little bit frazzled now. Go ahead.
It was just like it was just going on what Julian said. It wasn't about scrutinising our work. It's about coming up with ideas and working as a partnership, I think, with everybody, and then setting up key challenges to what policies might be there, and then you're giving some ideas to cabinet and officers that they could take forward, and then coming back with a report, and that could be scrutinised. That was the point I wanted to make. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so moving on to scrutiny referrals, feedback and follow-up actions. There is only one follow-up action, and that was the last meeting. There was an action agreed on developing a task and finish group to review development of a procedure for the allocation of replacement bins. So having spoken to the committee, and Councillor Salmon, you weren't privy to the last part of the conversation because you had IT issues in the pre-meeting. But just to sort of let everybody know, so what we were proposing was that because it's being dealt with in neighbourhood services and we didn't want duplication, that we wait to see what comes out of neighbourhood services scrutiny committee. Once those conversations, sorry, bear with me a second. I've got just on the chat a second. Yeah, so we would wait to see what comes out of the meeting with or the conversation with cabinet member in neighbourhood services, and then as a committee we would determine whether or not there was anything left for this committee to mop up. Would that be a fair assessment of our discussion and agreement?
I'm happy with that, Chair, and I come back to you on, bear with me now, 20th of July, I think, is the next committee meeting for you.
Yeah.
We'll come back to you by then.
Okay, so if we record as an action, if everyone's in agreement, we'll record as an action that Councillor Salmon can give us a bit of an update on that particular outstanding action. Is that okay?
Yeah. No problem, Chair, for 20th of July. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Anything else on that particular agenda item? Any questions or comments? Okay, moving on. Number 6 is reflection and evaluation of the meeting. I know that it's probably felt a little bit disjointed, and I'm almost regretting trying to do things differently. I don't think I'll be so quick to suggest anything in the future. I'll just do it as it's always been done.
Like that, Tanya.
No, I don't mean that in a bitter way, Julian. It just seems to have backfired a little bit. It was just my way of trying to change it up a bit. And I don't know whether I put it across in an incorrect way, but it just didn't go as I thought it would, which is par for the course from time to time. Anybody else have got any feedback or reflections on the meeting?
I think it was quite an interesting meeting, and I think there were conflicting views, and I thought it was quite a good debate, and I could see a lot in what you were suggesting, but I thought it really went against all the basics of scrutiny and the executive, really, with Andrew. I thought that it was, but it was a good. I could see the what you were trying to get at, and it was in that sense. I thought it was a good idea, but I don't see how the two practical terms they fit together.
Well, as chair, I'm happy to go back to the drawing board, and obviously it's a democratic process that we're all involved in. I'll go back to the drawing board, and I won't quite give up on trying to change things around a little
Never
bit.
give up.
But I do apologise if that caused disruption to the meeting as a whole. So if nobody else has got anything to add to that, we'll move
Chair,
on.
I think Claire Payne is.
Sorry, Claire, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Chair, don't sort of lose heart over it at the moment. It's something that's quite sort of, like say, is proposed this evening. Perhaps if scrutiny support can give a little bit of background, perhaps sometime in the future this may be a discussion again. It's just for sort of scrutiny support really to put members' mind at ease that if you sit and do some scrutiny work before a decision is made, you are just there as a critical friend. You aren't making any decisions that you are then scrutinising yourself later on. So perhaps not for now, obviously, decisions been made, but perhaps sometime in the future, it's for a wider discussion to make sure that those lines are perhaps a little bit clearer.
Okay, thank you, Claire. As always, a great contribution. Okay, one last comment then, Julian, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. As I said, you know, I was pulled two ways because I agreed with a lot of what you said and as a way of working, but my main concern was what Clive put it over very well. I agreed with him, but I think Claire said where she's in another place. I'm not sure where. Her experience of scrutiny was slightly different and was more in line with what you were suggesting. So I'd just like to make a suggestion that you as chair maybe talk to Caris. She's the one who puts together the constitution and the remits of the various committees, scrutiny, cabinet, and so on. So perhaps it would be an idea if, as you said, you go back to the drawing board, but when you do, perhaps it would be a good idea if you spoke to Caris and floated out your ideas, and if she says to you, well, there's no reason why you couldn't do it that way, then perhaps come back to the next meeting, whatever, and say,
well, I'm not going to be overly precious about the way we do it, Julian. It's more about I know that there is an agreement across the whole authority at the moment for us to do scrutiny better, for us to improve on our scrutiny function. So, you know, I'm not overly precious how we do it. I just want to be part of making it better. So, but yeah, I take your advice on board, and with that, I think, unless there's anything else, I think we need to move on now. So item number 7, any other business? I don't have any. So thank you all very much for your time this evening, and I shall see you in the next scrutiny meeting. Or if not, actually, I'll see you all tomorrow in full council.